How would you describe the tone of the Outer Worlds?
Dark humor.
Dark humor, silly humor.
Well, the game itself has kind of a dark tone to it, but we both agreed that it's not fun playing a game that's constantly morose. Well, except Dark Souls. We just don't want a game that drags. I mean, you're playing it for 40 hours and you're like, oh my God, it's so sad and despair everywhere.
If you have something that's all silly or all dark, it's not silly or dark because it just becomes this one tone throughout. And it's rather boring. It just adds more depth. It feels, to have the kind of combination, to me, is better than leaning one way or the other. When you have stuff that's silly, to have some dark underpinnings to it, it adds more emotional resonance with people. It kind of can speak to more general themes than just being a joke.
Did you learn the lesson on Fallout then? Was that the first example of that?
We stumbled into it on Fallout.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where we kind of, we stumbled into it and we like looked back on it and looked at what we'd done in the past and we're like, oh, that's why some of this stuff worked. So it became something we didn't even think about until after the fact.
I mean, the trailer had a perfect example of it where you're told to make a decision and you just shoot someone. And you didn't have to, but it's really dark. But then, Ellie's like, doo-doo-doo. The game has a lot of points in the game where you have to make a really serious decision. And sometimes there isn't a good decision. Then we try to get lighthearted. It's up and down.
Comedy in games is so hard. You guys could make the greatest RPG ever made, but if that comedy sucks, it's going down.
Yeah, it's hard getting that tone throughout the entire game and with different people.
It's the layers and the depth, I think. People clue into one side of it or the other, and getting them to like, no, you need to really mix the two, the really dark stuff and the humorous, silly stuff. After a while, people started to really get into the hang of it, and they're coming up with some great stuff now, but it was a little bit of a challenge at the beginning.
What we found really helps is when concept art is putting together stuff, they send us the sketches and we'll suggest labels or phrases and things, and then when that disseminates, that makes everybody get, I get what you're doing. So I see what these product slogans are like, or I see what these people look like and what they're wearing. And
I think that was the biggest, or has been some of the biggest concern, I think, when we had the trailer, how people were going to react to it and some of the stuff that we showed in the B-roll. Because we think, we still think we're kind of hitting all the same notes we usually do. But you never know what people are going to key into or relate to or not. And there are going to be some people who it's just not their thing. It's just we've skewed maybe one way or the other too much for them. But hopefully most of the people who have loved the stuff we've done in the past will think that this feels pretty much the same. And it's continuation.
You can just avoid it. The slogan we have, the giant moon man, going like, I can't do my head that way. One of the artists loved that so much, he said, well, why don't we have a helmet that looks like that you can wear? And we're like, okay. It's not obvious that it's available, but you can get it in the game. And if that's what you want to run around the game looking like, great.
Do you guys have any guidelines for like the writers in particular? There's a sweet spot which is comedic world, but maybe the line-to-line writing doesn't need to be filled with a bunch of jokes.
It's got to be situational and contextual. It needs to come from the story you're telling and from the character. We try to avoid just writing funny things just for the sake of them being funny. They need to have some deeper, they're explaining who the character is or something about the world or something about the story that we're trying to tell. That's difficult as well. And sometimes it goes the other way. Somebody will come up with a good line and we're like, well, that really doesn't have much resonance or depth to it. So let's add the depth in. Let's make that work somehow.
I know the one guideline I like to throw in, because I don't do any of the writing, is I want them to avoid inside jokes. It's okay for people to interpret things on different levels, but don't make people feel excluded. Don't have somebody say something that's obviously funny, but it's like, well, unless you remember your Fourier transforms from advanced calculus, you're not going to get this joke. Some of our jokes are visual references, so it looks normal, but some people go, wait a minute, is that from that movie? And then you suddenly get, I see why they put that in there.
During playtests, are you getting a lot of feedback on the comedy? Have you gotten to that point in the game yet where you're making people fill out, how funny is this? Scale of 1 to 10.
I think we got a lot of feedback even before playtest.
Yeah, we don't, it's kind of like we look for more overall feedback when we do things like that. What do you think of this in its entirety? We do ask things like, did any of this fall flat? Was there stuff that you thought was too much or too little?
Have you done really long play sessions yourselves? Where I don't know if the game is playable front to back, just to see just to make sure it doesn't get too grating with this consistent tone throughout the entire experience.
Yeah, that's something we're really looking at. We don't want to have it become like, here's an area with a ton of jokes and here's an area with no jokes whatsoever, or humor, I should say, not really jokes. Now, we did have that at one point, and it is a balancing act because what tends to happen is you come to an area or a bunch of quests, and it seems some of them can seem kind of funny, but by the time you get to the end, a lot of times it gets a lot grimmer. And so some of the comments we've gotten is like, well, this area starts off really fun, but it gets really grim. It's just like, well, if it was silly the whole way through or funny the whole way through, it kind of wouldn't have that underpinning or that kind of resonance we're looking for.
The game has a tendency to get darker as the storyline progresses. As you understand more of what's going on, you're like, oh, this isn't good.
So we have to try harder to mine humor from those situations.
Yeah.
But it does take on a different tone after a while. But that's good. I mean, it makes it feel like, or makes it not feel like the whole thing is just, this one level. It has its ups and downs.
Has the tone gotten sillier throughout the course of development as you found that voice more and more? Like when you started out in the project, did you imagine it would be so absurd?
Well, we try to put a hard break on Too Silly. Wait, let me rephrase. Leonard tries to put a hard break on Too Silly.
I was gonna
the same
say-
way I try to prevent it from being too dark. I don't want people to finish our game and be depressed for 2 weeks.
Only 1 week, I was for.
It's fine.
No, I just laughed when you said, has it gotten sillier? I'm like, Tim can't get sillier. Tim is just at a constant level of silliness.
But I usually say, okay, that's the level we asymptote to that, but we do not achieve that.
That's the tough thing is like we were trying to really find where the line was. Like, which is the line we're not going over? And it's difficult because there was a line, and I'm not going to talk about what it was. It wasn't a line, it was something that was in the game, but the metaphorical line. And I thought it was funny. Everybody thought it was funny, but I had to really step back and look at it. And I talked to a bunch of people on the team about philosophically and metaphorically what this meant for the whole thing. It crossed the line, and the line was that it broke the fourth wall in a way. It's just like there's no conceivable way that this would have happened in this world without it just being like a pure joke. And so that was where I'm like, instead of throwing out it completely, we kind of retrofitted it to make it like, okay, I can understand how this could have happened in the world. And that's a tough line, or that's a tough thing to clamp down on, because you have a whole bunch of people who just love it and think it's hilarious. But you're like, okay, if we start going down this road, it's going to start undermining things, and here's why, and you have to get into this deep discussion about like why. Here's how humor works, and here's why this is what you're saying by doing that. Then I get the reputation for being the person who doesn't want the game to be fun.
We did agree, though, at the beginning that if dumb dialogue and dumb actions are usually funny.
Yes.
So we kind of agreed that's an outlet for some silly stuff. And also, if you make a character who's got a below average intelligence, you should expect that. So don't play the game as a dumb character and go, that was kind of silly. Of course it was. You have no right to be doing any of the things you're doing. You shouldn't have even been shipped to the colony in the first place.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is an area where we kind of like relax some of that stuff and just be like, if it's funny, let's go for it.
We have an entire path.
Yeah.
What's the right level of dumb? Is it Homer
That's a good
Simpson
question.
dumb or below Homer?
We talked about it. It's not duh, which we...
That was
sometimes in Fallout 1, it was like, you're literally walking around going, duh. Your character is situationally unaware of things. So things that the player's getting, your character is not.
Very dense, doesn't understand social situations, doesn't understand the meanings of some words.
But you think you do.
Tries to make it seem like they understand more than they do. Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, kind of thing.
Yeah.
They can't put two and two together. And that's also where, on character as well, we're kind of like a little bit more fast and loose with that. Because there's things where it's just like, oh, well, obviously this guy knows a certain amount, and you might have a line, an hour later that it's just like, this guy seems completely clueless. But we're not, making it like, oh, this has to be a consistent level of stupidity for this character. It's just whatever really fits the moment.
And your companions call you out on it sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially Ellie, she'll be like, really? You think that? Okay, we're going to go with that then.
It'd be nice if they could just abandon you. Just all right.
I don't think they ever leave you for being stupid.
No, because they would have done that. They wouldn't have even gone with you in the first place.
Also, one of them isn't that bright himself, so.
Are you feeling anything that can be construed as explosive cell death? No? Wonderful. Let's get started.
I think that people who have loved the stuff we've done in the past tonally are really going to enjoy this. That's my hope, at least. I think that we're really hitting that level, the feel and tone we wanted.
That part of us hasn't changed that much. So if you liked it before, you'll like it again.